People who haven't seen the film, and that's, just about everybody except for those of us who've seen the preview, there's one particular stunt which got a guy $40,000 for one jump. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, they wanted me to do it, you see.
Yes.
And I said, well, I couldn't do it for $40,000.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't live to spend it. But it was to go off a 5,000-foot precipice.
On skis?
On skis.
Mm. And did he do it in one take?
One take, and his last.
I was looking through a magazine one day, and I saw that this fellow had skied off El Capitan and then opened a parachute.
We discussed it, and I said, but is that possible?
Well, let's find this guy.
People have defined adventure as something having a large element of the unknown, and the unknown could kill you.
So we went out to California, got a hold of Rick, and it turned out that he'd actually never done it.
So yes, a very warm welcome to everybody for this incredible episode of Really 007, where we're speaking to one of the key members of the 007 stunt team, Rick Sylvester. Can't quite believe this has been a long time in the making, maybe 2 years it's taken, I think, for this chat. But it's well worth it because Rick is perhaps the biggest stunt legend that there has ever been. And we can't wait to hear about his 2 films in the 007 canon. First of all, The Spy Who Loved Me, with that iconic ski jump, the parachute jump in the pre-title sequence, and then the mountaineering and climbing stunts from For Your Eyes Only. So, Rick, how the heck are you, mate?
A little confused these days.
So we all.
I'm in uncharted territory. It seems like I'm getting quite old. I've never been this age before. I've got to get realistic. Moving things from my bucket list to my fucket list. Please pardon my finish.
We're here in rainy England, where the summer has well and truly finished. Whereabouts are you for our listeners, Rick?
I'm in the ski resort town, with apologies to Prince, formerly known as Squaw Valley. It hosted the 1960 Winter Olympics.
Yes, yeah.
A bit of we're in the Sierra Nevada mountains in eastern California, not far from the Nevada border, at elevation 6,200 feet.
Wow.
So over a mile high.
Right.
And we hosted this hosted the 1960 Winter Olympics. The Olympics before in Cortina was the 56 Winter Olympics.
Yes.
For Your Eyes Only, a lot of the scenes were filmed in Cortina.
Yes, yeah.
That's right, which I believe is hosting the next Winter Olympics in a couple of years from now.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Well, somebody like you is always going to be living in that kind of area. You wouldn't be a city boy, I wouldn't have thought, Rick.
Yeah, those days are behind me.
You sensed a picture of a bear basically in your backyard, is that right?
The bears are very common here.
Yeah.
Wow. These are black bears, not to be confused with other species like grizzlies. They're more afraid of us, and with good reason, than we are of them. There have been a few deaths, a few maulings, and a few deaths by black bears, but never in California or its adjacent states, Oregon, Nevada. But about a month ago, there was a death. It's the first documented death by a black bear. I've been charged 7 times by black bears.
Ooh.
Charges, and every time food was involved, where they get into people's garbage, that garbage isn't properly secured. It's their feast, and you're interfering with it. So I've been charged 7 times, but now with this death just about a month ago, not that far from here, that was very disturbing.
Goodness me. You always seem to be in these kind of scenarios. We've heard you being described as a daredevil, Rick. Is that fair?
Well, that's a kind of cliche-ish term. But when you do things in the risk sport category, the real terms, the real issue is being in control of the situation as much as you can be.
Yeah.
If you define adventure as something having an element of the unknown, then there's always going to be that. It's overcoming.
Yes.
Courage is overcoming fear.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know people who didn't have a lot of fear in the climbing community, and many of them aren't with us anymore.
Right, okay.
I'm a big coward, if you want to know the truth.
No,
I mean...
That's one reason I'm still alive.
Yeah.
But what you're highlighting is that there's a positive element to fear, isn't there? Fear actually keeps you alive and keeps you safe as well.
Yeah, exactly.
When did you start getting into your adventures, Rick? What was it from a young age, and how did you get into them?
When I was young, I was an indifferent athlete. In high school, I was on the football, your term for soccer.
Yeah, okay.
American football.
Yeah.
Senior of high school, I was the lightest man on the team. I was second string B team, not varsity or junior varsity. I was in track. I was a pole vaulter. The first thing I was any good at was wrestling.
Right.
Because wrestling had weight classes. As far as adventure, getting into that, you don't choose it. I think it chooses you.
Right.
And for some reason, I decided that I was interested in skiing. I didn't have any friends who did it. And that same thing happened with climbing. I got into skiing and climbing. And that set the course of my life.
Because skiing is a very different discipline, isn't it? You do need a lot of practice and you need a lot of access to the slopes, I guess.
To get good at anything, I'm sure you've heard of the 10,000-hour rule. It takes 10,000 hours to become proficient at something.
Yeah.
Skiing, falls under the risk sport category. So does climbing, more so. Even a simple climb when you're 10 feet off the ground, you could kill yourself. But climbing is the most addictive thing I've ever been exposed to. And so far, it hasn't proved to be a fatal addiction. I had ambition to be the first person to set foot on 3 planets, and the moon didn't count.
Wow.
I was part of a group in Yosemite. We had no visible, this is just before the hippie period, we had no visible means of support. We were camping illegally, shoplifting involved, this and that.
We won't tell anyone.
And I got the idea, there was a real conflict between the Park Service and the park concessionaires and the climbers. You're never supposed to wear your climbing shoes around anything that would identify as a climber and never have a rope showing in the back of your car. I went from thinking of climbing as romantic heroes to vagabonds and undesirables. Then there was one national climbing magazine at the time, and it published it had an ad, climbers wanted for ski patrol work.
Right.
This provided the answer to me, a way to stay in the mountains year-round, getting on ski patrol. And I did that for just 1 year, and then I became a ski instructor.
One of your most famous ski jumps was the jump off El Capitan. Could you just tell us about that experience and your inspiration behind it? Because obviously, I suppose in some ways, that was the springboard to the Bond stuff as well.
Oh, completely. I came up with that idea, and it's completely different from anything else in my CV. I was working in Hawaii as a carpenter apprentice and a laborer. After a couple of years in ski patrol, I'd come up with this crazy idea about skiing off El Capitan. I asked for time off to go down to the city to a skydiving center and learn how to skydive, which is something on my list of things to do, but now I was doing it as not an end in itself, but as a means to do this ridiculous thing. I could not believe that I was making the first step towards putting this crazy idea into action. Made my first parachute jumps. Eventually, did ski off El Capitan.
Yeah.
It was a slow news day.
No.
And it actually got a lot of front page coverage.
Yeah.
Anyway, that led to a Canadian Club ad. These adverts appear in magazines. That led to the Bond people seeing it and thinking it might work out in a Bond film. Canadian Club Whiskey was doing magazine adverts based on adventure. Before that, they'd had a thing about hiding a case at Canadian Club. It was a contest. You'd have to find the case with the clues they gave. Then they went into adventure. When they called me, someone gave them my name, suggested that ski base jump, as became known. When I thought the acronym base hadn't yet been coined, so I had to call it the less poetic just ski parachute jump. They wanted to do something in South America. They hadn't done an ad in South America in a while. I'd climbed there one time in Patagonia, southern Argentina. I was the one who suggested the Canadian Club people Baffin Island. And we went up there, and the helicopter pilot felt he didn't have enough experience to land on top of Mount Asgard. It's a twin-summited peak. I thought he was convincible because if the pilot doesn't have confidence in his own ability, maybe you don't want to try to convince him. So the thing never happened, actually. It ended up being fake. They superimposed some of my motor drive Nikon still photos from Yosemite against the Baffin Island background.
Right.
And then during an interview, I tell that really happened, which was a huge embarrassment to the Canadian Club account. And the ads were eventually pulled from the magazines, but before they were, I think it was Michael Wilson who saw it, and I really think it was, I've always meant to ask him this, that it was really his idea. He's a very
Oh, right, okay.
only one of the Bond books had skiing in it, On Her Majesty's Secret.
Yes, yeah.
You guys very well know. The one Bond film that George Lazenby played Bond in. Supposedly Fleming had, Cubby Broccoli and his partner Saltzman up to then, who'd gotten the film rights. By the way, one reason the Bond films, the Bond books became so popular was that, the American president, Kennedy, said he read one.
Yeah.
And that was the kiss of life. And then Broccoli and Saltzman got the film rights.
Yeah.
And supposedly Fleming said, you really shouldn't film The Spy Who Loved Me. It doesn't have all the exact locations and so on. So it didn't occur in the book, the ski jump.
No.
But, anyway, and the rest is history.
Yeah. It's very, very Bond, though.
And the reason I got the work, was because I was the only one who did that.
But you invented it as well.
It was listed in, we call it the Guinness Book of Records. You call it the Guinness Book of Superlatives.
Yeah.
It was listed there for a while. It's easy to get in that book if you're the only one who does something. And I got the work because I was the only one who did what later became known as a ski base jump.
Yeah. You're a pioneer, though. You've got to have that imagination, the talent, and the hard work to pull it through, though, haven't you? And it's not like you can just say that there's this stunt you want to do and then the next day you can do it. There's an awful lot that goes into preparing it, I guess, as well.
Well, for me, the main thing was learning how to skydive.
Yeah.
I made about 50 jumps, which is really, there's people even back then who'd made thousands.
Yes,
I was a novice at that. But I had a lot of, wrestling was really the key thing in my life. I wasn't world class, but I was better than average. And it gave me a lot of confidence when I got into climbing. Because back in those days, people didn't train for climbing the way they do now. But, being on teams in high school and university, you really train. So that gave me the confidence that led to whatever successes I had in the fields of skiing and climbing.
Who was it from the Bond world who contacted you and approached you regarding the jump?
Well, that was an amazing moment. I had just gotten unemployment, what you call the dole. I remember they asked why you're looking for work, and it was end of the ski season. I think I said the snow melted. About that same time, I get a call from London. It was the first conference call I'd ever had and the first transatlantic call. And the voice said, "Hello, this is Cubby Broccoli."
Wow.
The broccoli plant.
Yeah.
And listening in on me. And I really wish I could remember. There were about two or three other people. I'm assuming now that one was Michael Wilson, his son-in-law.
Yeah.
And they'd seen the ads in the magazines.
Yeah.
And Cubby asked if I'd be interested in doing that, repeating that for a Bond movie. And I said, definitely.
Of course.
So that was a great moment. But the piper had to be paid.
Yeah.
Anyway, I ended up doing the guy who approached me, who turned out to be a crook, but that's another story. Some filmmakers. The problem was they were afraid to stand on the edge of the cliff. They weren't climbers. The footage that resulted, 16 millimeter, it shows me going to the edge, and then I go over the edge, and after a few feet, I disappear.
Yeah.
Rather than going off an almost 3,000-foot cliff, I may have, gone off a 15-foot cliff.
Yeah.
So now I survived. That was one of my goals besides doing the thing, which seemed like a new goal arose to get good footage.
Yeah.
So it got the publicity, which I never expected. I ran to a bunch of filmmakers who worked on Clint Eastwood's movie, The Eiger Sanction.
Yeah.
Not the bit done in Switzerland. The main character played by Eastwood. The story is that he has to get back in shape for climbing to solve this mystery. So he's climbing in the desert, just rock climbing, not alpinism, mountaineering. And these were the guys who'd worked on the desert portion of that film. It's a very spectacular thing called the totem pole. And so 2 weeks later in Yosemite, went back and did it again. The skydivers, when you jump out of a plane, after you've gone for a while, you have the air builds up underneath you, and that's why you're able to make maneuvers and control yourself. Skydivers wear a kind of bulky suit. You want to trap as much air as possible. But I'm wearing a tight downhill suit with heavy plastic ski boots, and then open the chute so it comes directly off your back. It doesn't go between your legs or whatever. I fell half a length before I got, and I have to get rid of the skis too, have to shuck them and then open the chute. I ran out of time. I couldn't reach it, and I came down on top of a tall tree, probably a 60 or something foot tree. Luckily, not by any skill on my part, but just by luck, the chute hooked over the top, and then I had to climb down the tree. The second jump, there was a progression. I got better at with each one. The second one, 2 weeks later, I got the skis off more quickly and the chute open, made a nice stand-up landing in the meadow. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Then there was one camera angle. It became the search for the perfect angle. I decided to do it a third time. My intention was never to do it more than once. I knew it was dangerous. So the third one, to get an angle that could only be gotten from a camera in a helicopter, shooting in towards me, I got the skis off and the chute open. I was almost still level with the summit. And now I was overshooting that meadow. So I was zigzagging back and forth, and I thought I was okay. And as I came down, the chute clipped a tree that was twice the height of the other one. Immediately it collapsed, and I was grabbing for branches, but they're breaking. Then I'm accelerating.
Cool.
I was completely helpless. It's one of the 2 riskiest things that if it happens to me, at least that I'm aware of. There were only 2 branches. The last 40 feet was bare, but the chute hooked. Nothing to do with any skill on my part. Some climbers had seen me come down. I was kind of trapped in that tree. The trunk was too wide for me to shimmy down it, but they tossed a rope, and I got down. It was a real mess getting the chute out of the tree. The camera that was in the helicopter wasn't working, so it was a complete disaster. So then when I got the call about the Bond movie, I actually was becoming pretty superstitious. I wasn't doing it just an adventure, but for filthy lucre.
He didn't actually ski off the mountain, but he very quickly said, but I could do it, and I know where I can do it.
He said, I can do it up in Mount Asgard in the Arctic Circle, but we can only be there for 6 weeks. All the rest of the time it's snowed in.
They sensed that it was going to be too expensive.
None of us were totally convinced. That's why we went out to Canada on that initial survey. And we went to the actual mountain, and we landed on the mountain, and we did all the tests that we could do. And I kept looking at him and saying, are you sure you can do this, Rick? And he said, oh, yes, I can do it.
They did this test footage of me standing on the edge of that sheer cliff in a bright red parka. That test footage came out so spectacular.
We went back with this footage, and Lewis and Cubby and the head of United Artists down in Risner disappeared into the theatre, looked at our material, and we waited outside. We weren't allowed in. And they came out after 10 minutes and they said, do it.
This was way in advance of the beginning of the film, and Louis Gilbert's idea was, well, if that doesn't work, we'll have plenty of time to figure out something else.
One of the main differences between El Capitan, Yosemite Park and Mount Asgard is that you're familiar with the previous surroundings, but this is completely new surroundings on Mount Asgard. I'd just love you to tell us about the process for the ski jump for The Spy Who Loved Me, how many times you actually did the jump, the issues with filming, perhaps what people like John Glenn, what their words of wisdom were, because this stunt is the most legendary and iconic stunt in all of cinema.
Yeah, really is.
And you are the reason for it.
Yeah.
And we just want to hear about that, and I know fans will too.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And I have to say one thing. I've never regarded myself as a stunt man, or
No.
more politically correct, a stunt person. Someone said on Wikipedia, I looked myself up years ago, and it said, I forgot exactly what it said, I was an iconic stunt person. So that's not at all true. I said I was an iconic Hollywood stunt person. When I was 12, my folks moved to Beverly Hills, which is right next to West Hollywood, which is next to Hollywood. That's the closest to becoming an iconic stunt person. I'm not a stunt person, per se. Yeah, Sociology 1A, we play many roles in life. And, I definitely played that role in the 2 Bond films, period. Those are the only stunts I've ever done.
Yeah.
Talking about starting at the top, in a Bond movie. So when I got that call Cubby and the others who were on the line. I was the one who suggested the location.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it wasn't their idea.
Because you knew it had to be snow and skiing, didn't you? Was there a time of year that it had to be done? And you knew that where would the snow be?
Yeah, it's the Arctic, you know.
Yeah.
But there is a summer.
Yeah, of course,
Albeit briefly. The Bond people did things right. We had a reconnaissance. We had a reconnaissance just to check it out. They decided that it was going to be too expensive. Even though you didn't have elaborate sets being built or, a Cecil B. DeMille cast of thousands or something that just takes very little screen time. It would be too expensive, and they weren't going to do it. But my understanding is I was standing on the edge in a bright red duvet with the helicopter circling, panning me. And only because that footage was so successful, they gave it the green light to go ahead with the stunt. That was $11 million budget. It went over it, or $14 million. It went over at $21 million.
Wow.
But considering that the stunt cost around $500,000, that's a very large proportion.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Of the entire budget for the film, but they were very happy with it.
Yeah.
I remember one of the reviews, I think in Newsweek magazine, said the stunt's great. Then he made a little pun, but the movie goes downhill from there. Made me think it wasn't considered one of the better Bond films. Actually, that's been a reassessment of that.
Yeah.
It does rank among the...
Oh, it does, yeah.
The top third.
But the Time magazine film reviewer said it was the greatest stunt in cinematic history, which I found interesting, as I consider myself only a stuntman for saying so on. But a few months ago, I got demoted to second place. An old friend and climbing partner, Jonathan Chester from Australia, he forwarded me a Guardian article, 25 best film stunts, and I got demoted to second place.
What?
Yeah, did you ever see that, by the way?
I didn't. I'd love to know what apparently beat it.
The Time article was ages ago. In a way, this was more special, even though it's second now. And of course, this is completely subjective.
Yes.
To be mentioned in the same category as people like Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Jackie Chan, alongside them, ahead of them, actually. Yeah, actually, I think it's ridiculous. As far as I'm concerned, Buster Keaton, who's my film hero, he could occupy all 25 spots. But that was really special. Interestingly, the one they had ahead of me was someone who I used to love, Jean-Pierre Belmondo. Back in the 60s, when they had the French New Wave films coming out, he was in the Truffaut movie, Don't Shoot the Piano Player. And I disagree that his stunt was better, should be first place. But others like Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Keaton, to be even mentioned in the same sentence with them, it was really special.
You're right. Everything is subjective, but however great this stunt is that came out as number one, it is not as iconic and memorable as yours, because the whole of England and pretty much the whole of the USA and all around the world know that stunt, to the point that it was replicated to an extent at the 2012 London Olympics. So the
opening,
the opening ceremony. So the iconography of your stunt will never be surpassed, I don't think. It'll be aped and it'll be copied and maybe even pastiched. But for me, you'll always be number one. And I know that's subjective, but that's my view.
Yeah, well, I was pretty sure that was based. They got the idea for that, and again, they had a flag in the design of the Union Jack. That opening scene had to be based on the Bond thing.
Yeah.
Another Eddie the Eagle. You remember Eddie the Eagle?
I remember Eddie the Eagle.
He said he was influenced by that stunt.
Wow.
Which I found amusing.
We've spoken to John Glenn and he's told us a little bit about it. He was obviously quite instrumental and it really kick-started his career into directing, because this was a very difficult thing to pull off, wasn't it? Wasn't one of the key things he said to you that, Rick, you're not Rick Sylvester when you're doing this, you are James Bond?
Yeah, that's the famous line.
The last thing I said to him was, go, Rick, don't forget you're James Bond. And I shoved the flag in the snow and buried myself in the snow.
But we arrived there.
Yeah.
We spend a week. Mount Asgard is actually a double-summited tower, and it's very spectacular. And, you know, you want to get the most spectacular things on film,
Yeah.
whether it's still or filming. When you film or photograph it with one tower behind, it's even more spectacular. Just
Yeah.
the plot, you know, there's a ski chase.
Yeah.
It begins in the cabin when he gets the call.
Oh, yeah.
And then the ski chase. It wouldn't make sense being on just a pinnacle.
Yeah.
So all the shots have to be close-ups. So I always found that interesting. So we get there and we start doing reconnaissance, setting up cameras, testing it. And again, what you said is completely true. Unlike El Capitan, which I spent nights on it, doing the multi-day climbs on it. But here, this is an unknown quantity to me.
Yeah.
And there's different wind conditions. And, of course, he could be blown back into the cliff face. They've seen my 60-millimeter footage of El Cap, so we know what to expect. We spent several days checking out camera locations. They essentially did the same setup that I had in Yosemite. There's a camera right on the edge of the cliff. It could get the run and then catch me when I go into space. There's a camera on a ledge directly below my takeoff point, which I'll go right over. That's going to be just a little edit in. The master shot is on the helicopter facing me tangentially. Anyway, and the weather's holding up, and I get a little worried. You know, this again is above the Arctic Circle. And then the bad weather sets in. John Glenn was there when we did the reconnaissance too. I didn't really know who was who.
Oh.
I thought the head of that guy, who was sort of the production manager, was Rennie DuPont, who's a Canadian. That you had to have at least, our crew was 11 people. It was a second unit. Some people said it was more like a third unit. Renee, you needed 10% Canadian. They wanted that.
Okay.
I thought he was the head guy. I didn't know the head guy was John Glenn, you know, who'd been the editor-in-chief of several previous Bond films. Renee, by the way, was the co-producer of, every year they always do a list around Christmas, 10 best Christmas movies. He was a co-producer of the film called A Christmas Story, about the little boy who wants a BB gun. And it's a comedy. It's a fantastic film.
Right.
And Rene was a great guy, and I thought it was so great later when he co-produced that fantastic film. And he took me aside the first day, and he said something, exactly what someone in my position wants to hear. He said, Rick, if you don't think it's safe, don't do it.
Right.
Your life is more important, you know. I was very, very happy to hear him say that.
Yeah.
John Glenn is part of Ian Productions. Rene is not. He's just a man hired on this.
Yeah.
Because he's there. There are a lot of inaccuracies in John Glenn's account. But
Oh, right. Oh, interesting.
you know, the film's a fiction, but the accounts of the filming are supposed to be fact.
Well, you can set them straight now.
There's a lot of fiction there.
Well, sure enough, the weather gets bad. And for a couple of days, people sit around. Nothing's happening.
And the money kept getting more and more expensive, and they were clouded in.
And now the calls start coming in from London as the costs keep mounting. Has he done it yet?
Studios calling up asking what the hell's happening, and why are you ever going to do this?
Finally, Cubby said, I've got to call. I have a feeling this boy has decided not to do it. It's a very dangerous stunt.
In the end, it's only a movie, so we don't want anyone to be killed or injured. So Cubby did call up Rick.
And he said, look, Rick, if you have changed your mind about doing this stunt, you come down. There's no film in the world worth your life. And he said, Cubby, I'm only waiting for the wind.
And sure enough, the mountain's clear. The storm is ending. There's clouds swirling all about, but there's no winds, amazingly.
I was up there in a white suit with a red flag. I said to Rick, don't go until this red flag is buried in the snow. Whatever you hear on the radio, whatever you think you hear. There's so many terrible stories, aren't there, of things going wrong.
Now the calls started coming from London. I never took these calls from Cubby. Has he done it yet?
Yeah.
But I was privy. I knew what was going on, which put pressure on me. You know, you have microclimates. I suggested that they should have a reconnaissance It's about 30 miles from where we're staying, to see if somehow, even though it's raining where we are, it could be good up there. So there's a morning flight and an afternoon flight. This went on for a few days, and everything was negative. It's bad weather up there, too. Now, the Montreal Summer Olympics was going on. Now the rain, rather than just being a little drizzle, is becoming really strong. There's one evening, I stayed up really late until the coverage was over. I was becoming superstitious. I was really having these more than thoughts like, oh, good, I'm glad the weather's bad, another day living. Quite concerned that I was going to lose my life. So anyway, then the afternoon flight, and this is the worst the weather's been the whole week, and they come back and said, we could do it. Oof. It's good. And I think, what are you talking about? No way. And what about what Renee said to me? Yeah, no way. Well, so we all hop, they left a lot of gear on top. There's clouds swirling all about, but it isn't precipitating. So it was a real hurry-up operation. And, they barely got it. It's amazing. This scene, it's amazing that they got it by the skin of their teeth. But the clouds floating around, and it covered the glacier at the bottom where I'm landing. It made a very ethereal look to it.
Yeah.
It was actually better. And then the scene, the famous thing about, John Glenn's going to, he's going to signal when the cameras are rolling. And then I go, and he makes a remark, Rick, remember, you're James Bond. With all due respect, that was not helpful.
Yeah.
What I have to do to pull this thing off. You ski to the edge, drop the poles, get into space, release the skis, and pull the ripcord when you get your spread eagle position. That's what I'm working on. Yeah. Not pretending I'm a fictitious action hero.
Yeah. Got more important things.
I had a regression. I had trouble getting in that stable position, the arch that you assume after releasing the skis. I fell out of camera range of the camera on the helicopter. It's a shot. So this is not good. The Russians are sent down to a lab in Montreal.
Now, there was one problem. The master shot, the camera and the helicopter, they missed me.
There were 4 or 5 cameras on it. And, the first one, he skied over the top of the camera and the guy lost him. So that didn't bode well. And then we had another one where the guy lost him. But there was one camera angle that took him all the way off and zoomed in and followed him all the way down. And it was one take and uncut, just one camera.
So we're all waiting on tenterhooks to get the results, and then we get the call. It's okay.
Yeah.
But it wasn't intended to be that way. Karen on the chopper was supposed to be the master.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it worked out brilliantly, the way it's sort of edited together and the shots they use. Make it feel more real, because the camera has to stay using the same camera, doesn't it? Lingering and showing. So, these days, if they filmed it, you just think it was all done CGI, computer effects. But because it's that one camera, you cannot get away from the fact that you are falling through the air, your skis fall off, and then you're going to have to save your life by pulling open the parachute.
Yeah. Well, I don't like a lot of quick editing. And of course, a bunch of editing also besides CGI, makes the audience feel, it didn't really happen. A little edit, they have a teeny bit of that fellow with a wide angle I skied directly over his head. He's just about below where I took off. But everything goes quiet. There's a little wind noise. And actually, it's slightly done in slow motion. The cameras are slightly overcranked. I was told that enhances action.
Yeah.
But, everything goes quiet. Yeah, I think that really contributed. Now what people are doing these days, you watch competitions, people are doing amazing numbers of flips and twists in the air and everything.
Yeah.
It's just pretty basic. But I always felt, what made the the shot, part of it, well, because 70 millimeter Panavision doesn't hurt, but the setting, this amazing setting.
Yeah.
It wasn't really that difficult a stunt. Of course, if I could lose my life, but the things much more complex that take amazing gymnastic ability. It didn't have that, but the setting did it. I've also felt that Gravity should have got a co-credit.
Yeah.
It wasn't really that complicated. It could be all or nothing if it didn't work.
But Bond wouldn't need to do flips and things in the air. He's just completing his mission and making sure he stays alive. So I don't think we need any of that. The stunt is simple to look at, but unbelievably difficult to do and incredible to appreciate. And I think that's why it works so well. And then the music kicks in, the Bond theme. If you start with the best opening ever, it's difficult to follow, but I think the film does. That just got everyone back to Bond. Yeah. Because the last film hadn't been quite as lucrative, and this one was the biggest Bond of all at the box office at the time. So that's in no small way, thanks to your stunts, your jump. So I think it's very difficult to say that the Bond films would have ended, but had we not had this opening and that British feel to it, of course, where the Union Jack parachute is obviously a great cinematic moment. If we hadn't had that, it was struggling to sort of feel as Bond, and I think that captured the audience's imagination, and it was just that thing where only James Bond would do this, and you need somebody like you who literally only you would do it.
Well, related to that, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman had ended their partnership.
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Saltzman was the more experienced. There was a lot of doubt whether Broccoli could do it as a sole producer, not the co-producer. Yeah. And what you said about the last Bond film not doing that well at the box office. So if this failed, it could have been the end of
you
very well know is considered the most successful franchise in film history.
Yeah.
Cubby was really on the spot. That stunt did a lot for it. Cubby always said it was his favorite thing.
Yeah.
And all the films where he was the producer.
Christopher Wood came up with what I think was the masterstroke, which when the parachute opened, there was the Union Jack, which always brought the house down.
All over the world, whenever I saw the movie, instead of people howling and throwing stones at the Union Jack, they were bursting into a spontaneous applause, which was kind of satisfactory.
You know, of course, at the premiere that Prince Charles stood up and applauded the stunt.
It was also Constantine who was the king when Greece had a...
Right, all right.
A lot of celebrities were invited to, they asked to see it again.
Right.
To screenings.
Yeah, there was a clipping years ago, probably in the Los Angeles Times, where they talked about, I didn't hear about the private screening. This involved deposed King Constantine of Greece, which had ended its monarchy, and King Hussein of Jordan, who'd attended Sandhurst and was an adventurous sort. He piloted fighter jets. They allegedly asked to see that opening scene again. But my mother said, if he knew you were Jewish, he might not have. I'm Jewish, but non-observant, and from a non-observant family, wasn't bar mitzvahed. We celebrated Christmas, not Hanukkah.
Yeah.
And then there was another article, I think I also saw it in the LA Times, where Covey was saying, we don't need a name-meeting actress. We don't need to pay for that. Look at all the money we saved. And that way we could afford that stunt. Of course, that's changed these past few years, under the tutelage of Michael Barbara. They are now using name actresses in the lead roles.
As somebody who, you've been involved in some of the most famous stunts in James Bond, and you've just explained that Spy Who Loved Me created that budget for it. But obviously, yes, you're right, they have gone for real big name actors and spent a lot of the budget on that. Do you think it's been at the expense of the stunts or not?
I never thought about that issue. The budgets are so high now, but they're raking in so much now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why under Michael and Barbara, they, as co-producers, they made that change. But for that's what Cubby said. We don't need, you need, whoever's playing Bond, you want a good actor for that.
Of course.
By the way, we always said, back in those days, Sean Connery was the best Bond.
Yeah.
Not Roger, but there were people who, Roger Moore was their favorite Bond. And I remember the crew when we were on 4 Eyes Only, because my work in the other one was all second unit. Someone was complaining, say, Roger's not playing Bond. They've made Bond into Roger, but Roger is better at humor and repartee, so they changed the character to some extent. That was completely understandable. Anyway, I always thought that remark by Cubby that were budgetary issues, of course, and that they couldn't afford that stunt if they'd spent a lot of money on a named female lead.
Somewhat embarrassing for me to mention. I was actually rooting. I was really becoming quite concerned. I was rooting that the bad weather continued. I really didn't want to do it, but it worked out to. Was such a novice in skydiving, and I still am. We had a representative from the parachute company who was with us. He was given time off. Sometimes parachutes, when you repack them, they're a complete mess. You have all the parachute cord, it's all tangled. His time was up. He left a few days as we left up longer than expected in Baffin Island. He left. I repacked the chute myself. The next time I used it at a skydiving center, I had my only malfunction. I packed it wrong. So if we had done a second take with that, I would have had to open the reserve. You cut away from the main chute. And the reserve was not, I think it was just pure white. It was plain.
So Cubby called me up one day and invited me to a sneak preview. You know what that is, right?
Yeah.
The film that was on the marquee was a Woody Allen film. And I relate a lot more to Woody Allen than I do to James Bond. Well, Woody Allen's not a fictitious character. And my mother was with me. Cubby was with another person. It may have been Tom Mankiewicz, the writer. I'm not sure about that. So we're in the second to last row. My scene comes on after about, 4 minutes or whatever. A couple of women behind us in the last row, one of them says to her companion, "How they do that?" And her friend says, "They use dummies." And then my mother swivels around her seat and says, "Yeah, my son the dummy." so true story.
Oh.
And then since we got in free, I think my mother, we must have come in separate cars. I don't remember her saying, but I stayed to watch the Woody Allen film because I was a huge Woody Allen fan.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They gave me an open credit, which I think they've done it at least once since then, or maybe twice. But that was unprecedented.
Yeah.
An opening.
That's incredible.
And completely deserved.
People said, it looks like one of the skis hit the parachute. And I said, no, I think it's this camera angle. And I never saw it much, but once we got, computers and everything, the internet, looking at it, a ski did hit the parachute.
Ooh, wow.
The parachutes, they opened with so much force that it probably wouldn't impair the chute opening correctly. But it definitely did, the ski definitely did hit the chute as it was deploying.
Oh, absolutely.
It's amazing, this, Rick.
We used a chap called Rick Sylvester for the double for some of the climbing on there.
He did the ski parachute jump in Spy Who Loved Me, and we used him again here to do a similar trick.
We had a sequence where Bond has to climb up the rock face. He gets kicked off and falls down and finishes up hanging on a rope.
That was quite hairy, I was that much. Everything was done for real.
Even if you're on a rope, if you fall far enough, the jerk you get can be very injurious.
I immediately went to special effects department. I said, I threw myself on the mercy. You got to save my life. I told them I'm going to do this scene, and I don't know how to do this.
The success of that, of course, meant 4 years on, you got another phone call, I'm guessing.
Yeah. When I was working on that, I mentioned to someone, if you ever have a climbing scene in a future Bond movie, please keep me in mind.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Good.
Right. I'm not the world's best climber or anything. I'm very experienced. So sure enough, that, then For Your Eyes Only happened. Now, there was a story going around that Hollywood doesn't want climbing. That the only Walt Disney movie to ever lose money had a climbing motif.
All right.
Wow.
I think it was The Third Man on the Mountain. It had Spencer Tracy. We're going to do this scene in the Meteor in Greece.
Yes.
And we had these rock pinnacles. I said I'd do it, but I didn't know how I was going to do the fall. I'd heard about, there was a new phenomenon of bungee jumping had just happened. There was a group called the Dangerous Sports Club of London. They did a couple of illegal jumps in Colorado, the Raw Gorge Bridge, very high bridge, and the other one was off the Golden Gate Bridge. And the bungee cord, it's what's used in aircraft carriers. When the jets land, they have the tail hook, and it hooks on bungee cords. That's what became the whole sport of bungee jumping. I thought maybe that's what I should use.
Right.
And so I can't believe I did this. I wanted to see what they look like. I went down to San Francisco, and I posed as a journalist that I was doing a story. And I'd read that they would, when these people were arrested, and they confiscated the bungee. And I said, you know, I was interested in seeing it. So we get in concrete room of the South Tower, the Golden Gate Bridge, one of the world's most iconic bridges. And I look at this stuff. It doesn't look anything like a climbing rope. It's like 2 inches in diameter. So that's not going to work. And then I'd heard about a stuntman. He was a very famous stuntman, Dory Robinson, who had records for jumping distance. He fell into an airbag. He jumped off that big tower in Toronto and using some device, deceleration device, called a fly. But it was on a wire, so that's not going to work. And then I knew about a couple of climbers in Colorado who'd done some jumping just on climbing ropes. So I'd heard that these two guys, one of whom I knew, Charlie Fowler, who died in an avalanche in western China trying to climb a mountain a few years ago, another guy I never met named Mike Munger, that they've been jumping off a cliff in Colorado. They had 2 ropes, and they had a second rope, a new rope backing up only if the other one failed. But I heard that one of them broke a rib doing this. I didn't even want to break a rib. So when I showed up in Corfu, where For Your Eyes is being filmed, scenes there, I didn't know how I was going to do this thing. And I immediately ran to the special effects department and said, you got to save my life.
Yeah, yeah.
I said I'm going to do it, but I don't know how to do it. You know, these guys are good. They really know their stuff. What they came up with was, it's a very simple thing, and I've always believed that there's safety and simplicity. People think that climbers are a lot of knots. We only use about 2 or 3 most of the time. They made this box. There were 3 things. The box kind of looked like a coffin. You had a bunch of sandbags in it. I think they each weighed 30 pounds. The rope would go into that. I mean, the rope is going to stretch anyway. But when I get to the end of it with the big fall, it's going to start pulling the sandbags to the end of the box. I weighed about 135, so I'll generate 3 Gs. The problem was, the day we arrived in that village, there was a funeral procession going down the main road, Greek Orthodox, number 1. Number 2, the location I found, you could look down, you could see the town cemetery right below.
Amazing.
And number 3, this box looked like a coffin.
The omens.
Now, what I did, being the huge coward that I am, the night before I'm going to do this, I actually had 2 ropes together. Even though I've never heard of a rope coming out of a factory being bad, I'm not saying. So I put 2 ropes together, and I was running rubber bands to keep them together because if they split, it wouldn't look right. So I wanted to look like just one rope. So I had 2 ropes. One is going to the box, the other's just anchored. The day before, we as a test, attached about 5 of these sandbags that weighed 150 pounds, threw them off, and that worked. That's approximating my weight.
Yeah.
There's more brains in those 5 sandbags than in my head. Anyway, the time came to do it, and I did it. And then here's my other example of dealing with the problem of dealing with non-professionals. My screen direction was, when I take that big fall and stop, I'm supposed to go motionless, like I'm stunned. I didn't do that. I wasn't celebrating like breaking out the champagne or anything. But I was making some motions, hey, it worked, and everything. And then I remember, oh, wait, I'm supposed to go motionless.
Derek Meddings, who was the special effects supervisor, built a trough to arrest his fall.
When I got to the end of the rope, we'd move these sandbags in this box. That would, these heavy sandbags, that would dampen the sudden deceleration, which is what could kill or injure you.
When I saw Derek Meddings' rig, I was a bit nervous because it was a real Heath Robinson affair. There was a man risking his life on the end of that rope.
The day we got there to the location, there was a funeral procession in the village. And then the box that the sandbags were in, it kind of resembled a casket. And also from the location site, we had a perfect view of the village cemetery. So you didn't have to be an English major, you know, for the symbolism not to be lost in you. I was worried about this. Letting go for a climber is, in a way, goes against the grain, because everything we work and train for is not to let go.
On a chilly October afternoon, Rick Sylvester lets go.
I get to the end of the rope didn't break, because I was still about 350 feet off the ground, and I was really happy, and I forgot I'm supposed to be stunned. I'm alive, it worked. And then I said, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to be unconscious. Then I kind of sagged, but luckily this doesn't show.
So then I went motionless. It didn't matter, just like the fact I hadn't done what I was, I fell out of range of the camera and the helicopter in the spy above me. But in both cases, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. They would have been happy with a fall half that length, but sometimes when you do a long fall, you could be slammed into the rock wall.
Yes, yeah.
The location that I found was in cut. So I realized if I did the whole length of the rope, I'd be further from the wall at the end of the fall. So I said, I'm going to do the whole thing. As soon as I said that, I regretted it. And that led to the sleepless nights, and so we finally did the thing. And
wow.
So
the feeling of it, though, what for both these stunts? I mean, are you what's going through your head? Because I'm right, it was only one take per stunt. Is that right?
Well, both of them end up being only. I mean, it could be more than one take. I was very worried about the big jump, the big fall.
Yeah.
And I'd never had a fall more than 15 feet.
Wow.
Very conservative record, which I'm very proud of.
Yeah.
That's why I was worried about that. I really hadn't done anything like that before. That's why that one worried me as much or more. There's less I could go wrong. Have the equipment, getting the skis have to come off the chute. When I got into climbing, 150 feet was your standard rope length. And then it went to 50 meters, 164 feet.
Yeah.
Then it went to 60 meters, 200 feet. That was around 160 feet plus some stretch of the rope.
Yeah.
So at most it was probably 170 feet, something like that.
Gosh.
But
10 times more than your previous record. Oh, goodness me.
Yeah, that was why that was worrisome, and I was glad to get that. When I was given the credit, I mean, credits are very important to people in the film business.
Yeah.
I'm not really in the film business, but it was a real surprise to get that opening credit. It wasn't in the contract or anything.
Okay.
I never would have thought of asking for it. It was unheard of. I was a little disappointed with the credit in that one, because not only was I stunt doubling for Roger Moore again, but I was head of the climbing team. I was a technical advisor.
Ah, right, yes, yeah.
And then they just listed the climbing team. My name was first, but I actually wasn't properly credited for that. Sound like world peace and hunger.
But one positive about For Your Eyes Only was that, am I right in saying that you met Roger Moore on that film?
Yeah, the first one, someone said we were more like a third unit than a second unit.
Yeah.
And I was like the star of it, But, it's very expensive to film on location. You do as much as you can in the studio.
Yeah.
So there was stuff I felt that couldn't be done all in the studio for Your Eyes Only. So the first unit was out there, and, met Roger, who's a great guy.
Oh, good.
Didn't have a lot of interaction with him. I wish I had more. He's very good at repartee.
Yeah.
He's very clever. A lot of actors, when you see them on telly shows and so on, some are good, some aren't. They don't have a script in front of them. But we're the second group. They'll be at one place dining, and we're somewhere else at different tables. So I didn't have that much interaction with Roger, but he's a great guy, and of course he had all his work with UNESCO and so on.
Yeah, he was someone who never shied away from saying he didn't do the stunts, and he left it to those who were experts. And in your case, of course, he would always credit people like you for doing these daring things that I mean, he didn't even like running on screen. So but I don't think for those, it doesn't suspend your disbelief too much. The shots look as if it could still be Roger, I think, on that fall. Because there's some cuts of Roger, and he is on the mountain, isn't he? Like you say, he did go on location. I know he's not dangling off a rope hundreds of feet in the air. I think the cuts work so that you do think it is Bond who's falling all that hundreds of feet.
Yeah.
He did a great job of the fall off. He was very, very good. But unfortunately, he was quite a small man, and he was very difficult to make him look like Bond.
He's a big guy. He's around 6'5", and I'm more like 5'6", and so, you know, with the $700 wig and the camera's far enough away, you can almost think really that I was Bond.
Well, a couple of things. He's very self-effacing.
Yeah.
I think he made the remark that his acting range is only 2 things, and he increased it to 4.
Yeah.
And I remember working on that in Greece. There was some talk behind his back that he's not playing Bond. They've made Bond like Roger. But
yes.
He was good at humor, so it wasn't like Sean Connery and so on.
No.
So they had to change. But there's a scene where he's tying into the rope. When I got into climbing, a certain type of knot, that was what we mainly used. There's a second knot. I had a choice of which to give him, and I wasn't thinking straight. I gave him the more difficult one to tie. Later it became, the first one is a bowline. The second is what we call an S knot.
How many times did you have to do the free fall?
Luckily enough, only once. But again, let me back up if you don't mind a bit. So just like with This Fire Love Me, there's a meeting in London. The first thing I remember is I'm asked if Pat Banzer, who at the time was married to Tina Broccoli, if I'd mind adding him to my climbing crew. And I have no idea who this is, his skill and experience level. You know, it sounds like a bit of nepotism.
Yeah.
But Pat was a Ford model, which meant he was over 6 feet. My wife always said he was very handsome. And because he's over 6 feet, his body approximated Roger's body more than my puny body. So he got added to the team. They didn't have a $700 wig for him as they did for me. So, you know, he had to keep his face away from the camera when he was being filmed. Every Bond film followed a formula to a certain extent. There's always the meeting with Q, the quartermaster, which show Bond the latest gadgets. And that's another thing which has not happened the last few films, like using now they're using famous leading ladies. Now the public, you know, there's this new device called Friends. These cam units are the only climbing protection devices that have movable parts cams. You trigger them, insert them in the crack, and then they expand. There were initially 4 sizes. To me, you know, the general public, if they're aware of anything, only was aware of pitons, the steel spikes that you hammer into cracks. And they're actually, since the steel is stronger than cracks, they're not good environmentally. They with repeated use, they mess up the rock. To me, Friends would seem like the quintessential Bond device.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about this. I'm going to make a contribution, and it's going to be great. I get no response at all. I was very disappointed. I couldn't believe it. The only reason one of them got used was at one point Pat, who's, after again, a member of the family, you know, eventually there was a divorce with Tina, he said they should use one. So because of that, there's a scene where they placed one, but it's kind of meaningless the way it happened. We ran into some rainy days because of the problem with the monks. There was a delay in getting there, and we got into the rainy season.
Right.
And, you know, you have that whole, they wanted to film something. You have that whole expensive crew standing around. And so there was a scene where in fact, there was a guy, it's raining. So they're doing some close-ups of placing pitons and the friend and a guy holding an umbrella over it. Ray Jardine, the one who invented them, who lives in Oregon, the state north of California, he was very excited that his device, his invention, got used in a Bond film.
Yeah,
so he
definitely.
said he wanted to send me something. Yeah, right.
Amazing.
When he said he wanted to send me something, I thought, great, he's going to send me a set of Friends. That was what he called them. What arrived was a bottle of champagne, which wasn't bad, but it ended up sitting on a shelf in the kitchen for years. I can't remember if my wife and I ever got around to drinking it. Yeah. Anyhow.
Oh, brilliant.
But now here's the deal. I think they were worried that I was trying to make I didn't understand what was going on, that I was trying to make a climbing documentary.
Right.
I knew that this is just to further the narrative, the scene, and also be one of the highlights as far as the action scenes in the film.
Yeah.
I had an idea, now the pitons were important because it's a good gag where he's climbing up. The bad guys are in a monastery on top of one of these rock towers in Greece's Meteora area. So he has to climb surreptitiously. And pounding in, hammering in pitons, he's muffling it with his handkerchief. That's not a bad gag. And of course, when he kills one of the bad guys at the top, he throws a piton like a knife. Now, those are good gags.
Postis, one of Christato's killers.
My idea was he's using the friends because you don't hammer them in, you just place them. And then the crack gets too thin.
Yeah.
So reluctantly, he has to start using the pitons. It enhances their gag, actually. So anyway, one of them got used, but it didn't really, it was sort of meaningless for what it was. It happened.
But the pitons in the use of them in the film is genius. I mean, obviously with the throwing of Apostis at the top, but you see the splitting of the piton through the rock bit by bit to build the tension and stuff. So I certainly think they've definitely taken inspiration from your ideas.
Yeah, I think it would have been better though. I don't think that it would have been better.
Fair enough.
Their gag was a good idea, but this even enhanced it. And by the way, there's something that's always been in my mind for a long time. The bad guy who's hammering out the pitons, and every time he does it, Bond takes a little fall. He could have just shot Bond. Maybe pounding out the pitons is more diabolical. That reminds me, when I was in college, I attended some great film series. The first one was on Hitchcock.
Yep.
And if I'm getting this correct, the first film where Hitchcock played a significant role was called The Pleasure Garden.
Right.
I've never forgotten this. It takes place in Indonesia, Malaysia, one of those places, the sun never sets on the British Empire and all that.
Yep.
And this man is the foreman or the owner of a plantation. He's having an affair with a native woman, and he gets a telegram that his wife is arriving on the next steamship, which brings in provisions twice a year, whatever. So he tells the woman he's having an affair with that she's going to have to vamoose, make herself scarce, because his wife is coming. And she takes it very badly. She starts walking out into the sea. He's lying in a hammock on the veranda, and the water's getting deeper and deeper, and now it's to her chest. And suddenly he bolts out of the veranda, and he runs into the ocean, starts swimming, and just before he gets her, she turns around with a smile on her face, like she knew he wouldn't allow her to kill herself, and then he pushes her under.
Wow.
So they're in Hitchcock's, at least my understanding, his initial film, there's that diabolical twist.
Wow.
So anyway, I'm not saying that influenced, the guy pounding out the pitons, more diabolical than just trying to shoot Bond from up above, because I think he's holding a pistol in one hand. The big fall I did was scary and everything, but where we used Pat, who later became a stuntman, in fact, he told me he had a bad accident once. He was doing, they had it was something where he was in a boat and they had too many explosives and he got badly injured. But anyway, he was the one who did those shortfalls.
Right.
And in a way, they're even more frightening than the big one I did. Because what happens, he's doing what we call proosing or jumoring. Now you have these metal devices, but back in the days, there were these types of knots you affixed to the rope. You're standing in a sling from each of them, and you put your weight on one, and you push the other up, and when you put weight, it locks onto the rope. So he's going up. I had a loop of rope, and I'm above him, and I had a release device. I'd release, and he would take those little falls. And those are very scary, because if you're ascending a rope, and suddenly it's coming loose, I mean, that's the last thing you want to happen. That means the rope has come untied at the top usually.
Yeah.
So every time I did this, we did about 5 of them I think they only had 5 takes to get the couple in the film. Pat screamed. He didn't know what was going to happen. Otherwise, his body may have signaled it, you know. So I began taking a fiendish delight in doing this, you know. So I found that quite interesting. I arrived in Corfu. I was just doing homework the other day. I picked up that amazing 2-inch thick book by Chowdhury and Fields. I find it fascinating. I reread the chapter on For Your Eyes Only, so I was cramming for this interview.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. That's OCD there. So a lot of OCD. I wanted the scene to be accurate. You may have one climber in the theater out of every 50 showings. Now climbing is more popular than it was then due to several factors like the indoor climbing gyms and being in the last 2 Olympics, Tokyo and Paris. The whole scene, to make sense, that to me is integrity.
Yeah.
And I think the details. And I think that's one reason why Better Call Saul is my all-time favorite TV series.
Oh, it's excellent.
It had a lot of, yeah, I just love that show. Also because the character had, I didn't think of the right term, but I read something. He had moxie. He had a creative, tough intelligence.
Yeah.
Which I've always felt I didn't have, never had that. We know there's a type of what they call free soloing when you're climbing with no rope, which Alex Honnold, a documentary of him free soloing El Capitan, won the Academy Award for Best Documentary recently.
Yeah.
But there's also a way where you could solo but protect yourself on a rope. And that's essentially what, was happening in For Your Eyes Only. So maybe there'd be only one climb in the audience in every, 50 showings. But I want to satisfy that person too. There were a few examples of things that long bothered me where that wasn't done. One was Gregory Peck in The Guns of Navarone. Remember that film?
I remember that.
Years ago.
Believe it or not, I was actually at the beach where it was filmed only last month.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which country was that in?
It's off the island of Rhodes. The beach
Rhodes,
is
right.
Rhodes. Is it Alec Quinn, the director? I think it's called Alec Quinn Bay now.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that was based on a true incident that happened in World War II. They had to take out this 2 giant cannons that were decimating the ships beneath. So Gregory Peck is a human fly, the only man who could climb this.
Yeah.
And he starts from the boat and he's climbing up and it gets wet. It's been ages since I've seen it. This is my faulty memory. Hopefully not. He's climbing up. He's getting a little desperate. And suddenly he pounds a piton in, grabs it, and keeps climbing. Now, what you do with a piton is then you attach a carabiner, a snap link, and put the rope through it. So if you get a few feet above and fall, you're being belayed from down below, then you only fall a few feet. They could have made that accurate and not detracted from the drama in any way. And the other thing I always think about was one of Clint Eastwood's movies when they're going to end up on the north face of the Eiger in Switzerland, which is the poster child for the dangers of mountaineering. Several died, biggest north face in the Alps, before it was successfully climbed in 1938. Clint Eastwood, in the book and then the movie, he was a former who has to get back in climbing shape before he goes to Switzerland.
Right.
They're climbing it's been called the most slender, tall spar in the world. It's called the Totem Pole. It's on the Navajo Indian Reservation in the American Southwest. And he supposedly is leading, but you could clearly see there's a rope above him. Actually, I've talked to climbers who didn't notice, so maybe I shouldn't say this. So I want to avoid faux pas like that.
Yes.
I wanted the climbing as accurate, but I always knew that the purpose of climbing, I'm not making a climbing documentary. It's to further the plot and to be an exciting thing. So anyway, I arrive in Corfu, and I never realized until I reread that chapter in 07, Some Kind of Hero, that was the initial filming before Your Eyes Only in Corfu.
Right.
I immediately ran over to the guys in special effects who assured me that how am I going to do this? I said, I'd do it. I don't know how. And they assured me that they could save my life and limb. That was an important thing for me. I told them that I had to be at the Meteor maybe a week in advance.
Okay.
I needed to get used to that type of rock. I was more experienced in granite and so on,
Yeah.
and limestone. And it's a type of rock called conglomerate. We have an area here in Central California called Pinnacles, which is now a national park, which is composed of the same type of rock, but I spent little time there. Some of us, before the main crew went there, we took the ferry across to the mainland. I remember conversing with Jaime Topo, who told me I had to visit Israel, how vital life was in Tel Aviv. My parents they donated to Israel.
Yeah.
I've still never been there.
Really?
Yeah. And of course, Topo is famous for his role in, not the film, but the stage version of Fiddler on the Roof.
Fiddler on the Roof, yeah.
It's great to me.
Yeah.
He was known as Israel's top actor. My climb partner, Chester, and I, we had a week like a climbing holiday. We had a taxi driver, Costas, who'd drive us out to the crag. He'd hang out by his car, getting paid all day. And then at noon, he'd drive us back into town. We'd get a great lunch, and then we'd go back to the crag for more climbing in the afternoon. This went on for a week. It was the life of Raleigh.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, it was like having a personal chauffeur inside.
Yeah, definitely.
So, that was fantastic. And then the whole crew showed up. They mentioned the problems he had with the problems with the monks. They made a deal with them.
Yeah.
And to film at the monastery. They reneged. It seemed like they reneged on the deal.
Yes.
And as a result, we ended up doing location scouting for something similar. We flew to Spain, a couple of hours south of Barcelona. There's an area called Montserrat,
right,
which has similar rock. So I had 2 days of my life in Spain despite reading all the Hemingway novels at the beginning of The Sun Also Rises. I've only been those 2 days in Spain my whole life. And then we actually were at England at an area, Cheddar Gorge, I think. And they had similar rock too, but it just didn't look like the Meteor. So we ended back there. Supposedly these monks did not have a very good reputation. Kazantzakis, in one of his books, who wrote as Robert the Greek, the monks supposedly at Mount Athos are very religious. These seem like they're very mercenary.
Right.
In one of his books, and I've always meant to look this up, suppose he talks about these monks having orgies of busloads of German tourists or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So they couldn't use one of the monasteries as a background, how they put all kinds of debris on the roof.
Yeah, yeah.
My memory is most of the stuff on the roof looked like sheets and laundry bedding. And I wanted to do a James Bond operation. I wanted to surreptitiously climb up there. I love climbing anything, trees, buildings, second-story work, cat burglary, you name it. I wanted to remove all that stuff before the monks realized that it had been done. My one worry was that the roof was Spanish tiles, something I was very familiar with, because that was the roof of the house in Beverly Hills where I spent my formative years. My dad had bought the mansion of the former Charles Boyer, a famous French actor.
Right.
In fact, that term, which you see so often now, gaslighting, was the name of one of his movies.
Right.
And I asked my father why he bought it, and he said, because we got a good price. Mansions were considered white elephants. People didn't want that type of home. They wanted single-story Western ranch-style homes. So he said he got it, at a good price. That's why he bought this mansion. It was only a few blocks from where Cubby Broccoli lived. It was a block north of Sunset Boulevard. Cubby lived right on Sunset Boulevard, just a few blocks east of that. But I knew that Spanish tiles were very brittle. They crack easily, and it makes a lot of noise. So that was my one worry about removing that debris so they could film there. And of course, no one agreed with me that I should do that, so it never happened. But I always regret that. That would have been a real James Bond operation. So they had to build a fake set. There was the issue of costumes. What should Roger wear in the climbing scenes?
Well, he decides to wear that beautiful blue jacket, doesn't he, in the end?
Well, yeah, but in the beginning now, what was current then was sort of skin-tight lycra with designs.
Okay.
I knew that wasn't going to work. I thought of bib overalls, which are kind of sharp looking, but that means socks going up to your knees. And then they said, no, we can't do that. Roger feels he has skinny legs. So that was the end of that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so there's some jokes behind his back about that. But and then the shoes, the top rock climbing shoe at that time were called EVs. That was initials of the French climber who designed them. They were mostly blue with a bit of white, so they dyed them so they're all blue.
Okay.
And then they just had regular trousers. Going back to Aspire Love Me, the cardinal rule of mountain photography, filmmaking, was almost red or yellow because it stands out from the snow.
Yes.
That's why I had the yellow suit I had in that scene. Franz Klammer, who was the top Olympic downhill ski racer,
yeah,
his winning the Olympics was held twice in Innsbruck, Austria. When he won it, one of the times that was considered the greatest downhill race in history, he was right on the edge, trying to get every bit of speed and very close to falling. So I said, I want to have, that's what I should wear. It should be a bright yellow Bogner, the manufacturer of ski clothing. Anyway, I only wore it after using it. I only wore it, I think, once on the local slopes. It wasn't exactly ski bum type garb. Maybe out here in the States in Aspen or Sam Ridge or something. But I was always too embarrassed to wear it after using the film. Related to that, when I got into climbing, all the ropes are either white, blue, or red. Later, they developed for the rope sheath all these exotic designs. The one I remember most had a funny name, Hollywood Rattlesnake. And so when I was supposed to buy the ropes, I ended up getting all these red ropes. To me, that meant drab.
Yeah.
But I totally, because compared to all those crazy designs, hey, just a solid red. I completely forgot, he's supposed to be climbing surreptitiously. This is red. It's a bright color. So that was another thing under the category of this is what the problem of doing non-professionals. Anyway, it didn't make much difference, but I was pretty embarrassed about that. So related to that was, we were discussing this previously, I was Roger's mentor. Unlike Aspire Love Me, it was all second year, but now
yes,
they want to do as much as they can in the studio because being on location is expensive. And they think they had to be there. There's a scene where he ties into the rope, and there's two main knots used for that. One is called the bowline, which every Boy Scout knows. And there's a rhyme that a squirrel comes out the hole, goes around behind the tree, and goes back down the hole.
Right.
The other, which is the one almost used all the time now, is called a figure of eight.
Yeah.
To me, they were about equal. But I decided to have Roger use the bowline, and he couldn't get it right. And eventually, he never finished tying that. He just pretended he was tying it, and he tucks his sweater over it, covering it up. The knot was not completed. If you look at the footage, so Roger was very gracious. He said, I made you look bad.
Oh.
But he was wrong. I made him look bad. I gave him the more difficult of the two knots. I only became glaringly aware of it afterwards. Again, the problem of dealing non-professionals. Location scouting.
Okay.
I was not good at that. I'm not good visually. I picture things with words. It's not my forte. So I was looking for crags that I could actually climb.
Yeah.
But what they wanted was a location where it would appear that Bond is way high, hundreds of feet above the ground.
Yeah.
But there were places that, there was no way you could climb it unless you pounded bolts in the crack. There weren't in the rock. There weren't cracks. So there's one scene in the film where he's up there. That was I, not Pat, and he's traversing across. I was actually, besides the rope that's trailing down from my waist, I was actually on a rope from above.
Yeah.
But that got erased afterwards, frame by frame, and computer erased. So I wasn't great at location scouting either. Carol Bouquet.
Okay.
The crew behind the back said, yes, she was a very beautiful woman. I think she'd been the Chanel No. 5
yes.
person. But the crew was saying her eyes are dead. And then she had this boyfriend who exerted a Svengali-like influence on her. There was a nickname. The crew had a nickname for him, Concord, because of the shape of his nose.
Wow, that's quite harsh, isn't it?
Yeah, right. But supposedly there were stories that they were tearing apart the hotel room like you read about rock stars doing and so on.
Yeah.
So they were not very happy with her portrayal. Oh, God. Who else could I slander now?
It's great to hear these stories, though. So you've talked about...
We're getting an exclusive.
Exclusives, yeah. I mean, you've talked about your time with Topol, sorry. Was there any... And you've talked about your stories with Roger. Did you have any dealings with Julian Glover?
I don't know. Was he on location? And I have no memory of that.
It was based in the Hideout, but if the Hideout was in Pinewood, then maybe he didn't go on location, actually thinking about it, yeah.
Yeah, it could have been mostly interior scenes. You know, there were some of the regular stunt guys there.
Yeah.
And there's a weird chemistry. Why, you know, am I taking work right from them? And what happened, and these guys are really in shape. One was, every time he had a moment free, he was doing push-ups and so on. And almost by luck, I did the best thing I could. I took them on a little climb there. And that was something they didn't do. So there was no hard feelings that I'm stealing work for them. I was doing something they couldn't do. I mean, they could have done that big fall because gravity does all the work there, but they're too intelligent to do stuff like the idiot they're talking to right now. As my wife said, the dummy. But so that was very fortuitous, taking that climb, because they realized that, hey, it's okay, you know, you do your thing and we'll do our thing.
Yeah,
so
definitely. The sandbags that were put to the coiled rope to make your fall look breathtaking. And obviously the work that Derek Meddings did towards that. Do you remember that process at all?
I mean, these guys in special effects, I mean, they know their stuff.
Yeah.
When I went over to their trailer and told them what was happening, and I've since read this has become standard for those type of things. What they developed has been used since. I don't know how specific references. These guys, unlike me, they're the complete pros. So they build this box open on the top that again too much resembled they build this little box that looks somewhat like a coffin.
Yeah.
Which wasn't reassuring. What they did, and they have a bunch of 30-pound sandbags inside. The rope, again, I used 2 ropes. I spent a couple of hours the evening before putting rubber bands attached to them, because if they split, it would not look right. I've never heard of a bad rope coming out of a rope factory, but I didn't want to be who knows. So I have 2 ropes. I'm actually attached to 2 ropes, not one, for the big fall. And one rope is going just anchored on the rock at the summit of the crag.
Yeah.
And the other is going to the box. So when I hit the bottom, it starts pulling the bags to the end of that coffin-like box. They weighed 30 pounds. I ended up displacing 15 of them. So multiply 15 times 30. That's, 450 pounds, about 3 times my weight.
Wow.
So you could say I generated 3 Gs. The fall exerted 3 Gs.
Wow.
So that was a very simple thing. Again, that's the rope, unlike spelunking ropes, it's dynamic, it stretches. But this, there's an old line. In fact, it's a W.C. Fields movie where they had shots in Yosemite. It's not the mountain that kills you. It's dangerous. It's just the last foot, the sudden impact.
Of course.
So this made it very, there was no pain involved.
Wow.
By the way, Michael Wilson's a smart guy. He was versed in many fields besides being an attorney. And, co-screenwriter, and said he directed an action scene in one film, but he realized that wasn't his forte. I think he may have been the one who saw the magazine advert that led to my getting the work in Spy Who Loved Me. The Big Fall, he saw a documentary, which again, another thing on my to-do list, of an actual climb. The Trade Schema, well, that's a town name, the German name drives in, and the 3 Towers. It's not far from Cortina in the Dolomites. And the west face is severely overhanging. And these guys who try to do the first ascent of it, one of them had a fall like that. It was so overhanging. When he fell, he's out in space. He's stuck in a way. There's nothing to push against so he could swing and get back in contact with rock. So he devised that, it's called a Prusik nut. He took off the lacing out of his climbing boots, which is more like rawhide. It's not the thin stuff we use now.
Yeah.
And that he had to ascend the rope, and that was supposedly where they got the idea. I'd like to say it was my idea, but it wasn't. For that scene of Bond Prusiking up the rope from an actual thing which had happened.
And it's absolute genius. I mean, that thing is, it's something that only James Bond would think of on screen, and something that only James Bond would do. It's probably my favourite part of the film, actually. The climbing up the rope and then the free fall. I love it. It's great.
Yeah, well, we got to give Michael Wilson his due. You know, I have a friend who's a huge Bond fan. A fellow I met a few years ago, Louis Bossamy. He's a German who has American citizenship, living down in Sacramento, a couple of hours from here.
Right.
And he was the one who said, you have to have a Bond website. And I was on no social media, not even Facebook. And I said, well, I'm a technological troglodyte. And he said, I'll set it up. He's administrator. And he set this whole thing up for me. If you Google Rick Sylvester, James Bond stunts, you get to it. There's a lot of stuff there.
Oh, wow.
And he told me, he was the one who told me a couple of years ago that Michael Wilson makes cameos the way Hitchcock used to make cameos in film.
He does.
Said,
he certainly does.
I know. The one where he's an inspector and he gets arrested, you know.
Yeah.
I thought it was hilarious.
There's some great... And then there's the one in Tomorrow Never Dies where he's one of the slimy newsreaders as well. That's a great one.
Yeah. I had no idea. I mean, Michael's a real ham. There was a Los Angeles premiere of one of the Bond films. I've completely forgotten. It was with Timothy Dalton or Pierce Brosnan when he was playing Bond. And I got an invite to it.
Oh.
Which meant that I had to run a tuxedo. And Tom Bradley was the Los Angeles mayor. He was their first and only black mayor. He declared it Cubby Broccoli Week. So my wife and I drive down to Southern California. First, it's going to begin with a screening at a theater in Hollywood. And it was kind of like a mini Academy Awards. Celebrities like George Hamilton, Wayne Newton, who'd been in the film, were there.
Yeah.
And the flashbulbs are going off. Because when my wife and I arrived, no flashbulbs. Who are we? We're nobody. and then I noticed, this is in front of the theater, Barbara Bach with a husband, Ringo.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, this is my chance to meet a Beagle. But I was I don't think, so fast on my feet. I go in to watch the film. I remember, I think George Hamilton, who was dating one of our past presidents, LBJ's daughters, always had that amazing tan. He's at the end of the row I'm in. You know, not too many people in there. I get this idea. I should have gone up to Barbara Bach and said, hi, we were in the same film. We never met each other. And then I turn and look at Ringo, and I say, I assume this is your escort. Like I have no idea who he is.
Oh, that's excellent.
But I don't think about this in time. So then there's a fancy dinner a few blocks away in a restaurant. Now I must have mentioned this afterwards because I didn't see them in the room, but my wife said, "Oh no, they were there." So I had a second chance to do this, but I missed two opportunities, which obviously because I'm talking about now, I've never gotten over it.
Oh.
But there's one other thing, which is one of my lifelong regrets. This is a big fete honoring Cubby Broccoli.
Yeah.
And there are certain people it's all prearranged, who are going to give testimonials, very positive testimonials about him.
Mm.
And because I'm not one of them, I'm just a lowly stunt double. In fact, was always amazed that I had anything to do with, executive producer. What was it? Executive producer having to do with stunt double? But I had this idea. There was a little anecdote that I wanted to tell, and I would have loved to have told, assuming my delivery was good. And I think it would have been one of the highlights of the evening. I should have gone up to them and said, "Do you mind if I say a couple words too?" Because what happened was, Cubby invited me to drive out to the studio, MGM, in Culver City.
Yeah.
So, I just lived a few blocks from, I can't remember, my parents still had that house. I'd gone away to, it's mostly in Northern California now. And he invited me to drive over his house, and they have a circular driveway with a remote controlled operated gate at the entrance. We had that too at our house, but we almost never had the gate closed. And I meet his wife, Dana, the novelist. I didn't know until the other day, she actually contributes to the films in some ways.
Yep.
So we go back to his car, his Ferrari, the only time I've ever been in a Ferrari. He opens the gate, and suddenly an old beater, you know what a beater is, an old car,
Yep.
not very expensive, enters the gate. And there's a black man behind the wheel. I'm not racist, because back then the term was prejudiced, but it felt like a trespass. It seemed really strange. Cubby seemed completely nonplussed. Oh, by the way, I thought Dana was his second wife. She was Cubby's third wife. And
Right.
Cary Grant was his best man at their wedding.
Oh.
At their wedding. Imagine that, Cary Grant, the greatest leading man of all time.
Amazing, just
I could not believe
amazing.
that stuff. I know, fabulous. And by the way, I've long thought. I mean, what's an executive producer doing with a stunt double? But I always felt there's a real egalitarian element here, and I've long thought that may have something to do to help explain. This is just my theory. The franchise success. Everybody pitches in. Forget about designated roles, status, things like that.
Yeah.
Class is such a thing in Britain. But the way Ian works, at least the way I experienced, it was really quite refreshing.
Mm.
So anyway, this black guy comes through the gate when Cubby opens it. But Cubby just signals him to pull alongside and says something like, "Can I help you?" And the black guy says, "Yeah, I'm looking for work." And he has his resume in his 8x10 glossy, and Cubby accepts it very graciously.
Wow.
And then he directs him how to go up towards the house, the circular driveway, and then drive back and leave. And that, to me, said so much. That was the anecdote I would have loved to have told that evening, but
That's
didn't
amazing.
have the guts to. I wasn't on the program, but I think they may have said, it wasn't going to take forever. That, to me, I mean, that guy had a lot of, I don't know how he ever got Cubby's address. You got to give him credit.
Yeah.
But the way Cubby reacted, and that was why, I mean, the great things of getting to be on those Bond movies, number one was doing the stunts. Number two was surviving them and without injury. And number three was getting to have some relationship with Cubby Broccoli.
Yeah.
That were the highlights of the whole thing for me. I probably should shut up now, but I just want to say one more word.
Go for it.
Because, and there's a thing where Sean Connery said that Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, when they had the partnership, they were the greediest people I've ever met in my life. And I was shocked when I read this.
Right.
And I always wanted to, if I got a chance to meet Sean Connery, I wanted to ask about this. I have a theory. They don't have to pay residuals to Screen Actors Guild and so on. And, budget's always an important issue. I have a feeling it's monetary, but because my dealings with him were so positive, and when I read that, it shocked me. So I didn't mean to go negative after.
No.
I thought Cubby was a prince of a man.
I think it's well known that whilst there was the fallout between the two men, I think before Cubby died, Sean Connery and Cubby did reconcile, which is really heartening. That is pretty much the only negative thing that's ever been said about Cubby Broccoli, really, isn't it?
Well, I was completely unaware of this, that they had a falling out, and now that there's reconciliation, I'm very glad to hear it. Yeah, I was not privy to any of this, so I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, the man's a legend, basically, and just to hear the stories from you about your time, you're a legend, and that you've been included in this story, and I just want to say thank you so much for your generosity and your time, Rick. The detail you've given of both stunts and your experiences is unmatched. Basically, I'm just sure that listeners are going to absolutely love hearing this. So thank you so much.
Well, it's very kind, and I have to thank you, because there's a great line I came across some time ago. A movie star needs 100,000, whatever, fan mail letters a day to keep up his or her esteem. A scientist needs a nod once a year from an esteemed colleague. I fit much more in that latter category. And so, just being asked to do this podcast with you, that's my once a year for my ego. So I have to thank both of you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Rick. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for your patience. Thank you again.
See you later.